Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Purposeful podcast. The goal of this show is to create valuable content to broaden your knowledge, hopefully inspire you to act, and get you in the right mindset so you can apply it in your own life to drive impact, generate meaning, and achieve your purpose. Now, today's guest is Chris Rollins. Chris is a purpose-driven executive coach who works with leaders, especially in the LGBTQ plus community, to experience new levels of growth, success, and fulfillment. He is on a mission to build a more meaningful, emotionally connected world where people love what they do and love how they feel. Chris is passionate about working with leaders to find their own voice and style so they can lead with purpose and authenticity. When living from his essence, he is compassionate, intimate, loving, joyful, and peaceful. Chris, thank you so much for coming onto the show. Let's check in. How are you doing?
I'm good, Kong. Thank you so much for having me. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you. You look sharp. Love it. I love your background.
Thanks,
You know,
man.
it's I try to come up with creative outfits when I'm, on these podcasts because I'm doing them on a weekly basis. Speaking of creativity, how does it show up in your life and in your work?
Creativity? Hmm. Yeah, creativity is it's funny. I was just talking about this with a friend this week because I actually don't think I spent enough time like carving out dedicated, focused time to be creative. I actually spent an hour with her. She offered a sort of strategic session to really dig into my business. And that hour was spent like really just imagining and like dreaming about possibilities for product offerings and workshops and what we might create. And I said to her, I was like, I don't spend enough time stepping back and really thinking about this stuff. Because it's so important to just step out of the day to day, because it's so easy as a single like business owner, like running my own business, of just getting so focused on generating clients, serving my clients, and being in the business. So it's actually it's a recent reminder for me to spend more dedicated time thinking creatively, coming up with prompts to just change the way that I'm thinking, asking different questions, to expand my thinking a little bit more. Um, so that's what comes up for me when you ask that question about creativity. It's something uh, that I really want to bring more of actually into my business, because I think it's really valuable.
Yeah, so let's talk more about your business. What inspired you to launch your own business, and what is it? Can you tell people a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, so I spent, 10 years in the corporate world. And when I had graduated college with a degree in psychology, I knew at some point that I wanted to work in organizational development, people, and culture. What I didn't want to do is get straight into HR as my first job and sort of get pigeonholed throughout my career in an HR function. And there's nothing wrong with that. I just knew I wanted a more diverse set of experiences. So with my psychology degree, I ended up going into a sales job for a software company. And the reason I was really drawn to this position was because they sold it as a really like management training focused, like leadership development, lots of feedback, grooming young talent. And I was all about that coming out of college. And that was the case. And so it was both shocking and rewarding and uncomfortable experience, like getting into cold calling and selling, but it was probably the best thing I could have done to start my career. So I spent the next 3 years or so doing various sales roles like that, and then transitioned into account management where I was managing the client side of the business. And that's really where I hit my stride and rose up through the ranks in the last company I was with to take on some sales leadership roles and ultimately landing in an internal position overseeing people and culture, sort of culminating in this career journey that I was really hoping to achieve. And had an amazing team, really great company. And I realized after some time that despite this being the job I thought I always wanted, it wasn't in fact the place that I wanted to be, the type of work I wanted to be doing. There are parts of it that really like made me feel alive. But on the whole, I was looking at my future path and thinking about the sense of purpose I had, and there just was a sense of disconnect there, a sense of discord.
Mm.
And so what do you do when you spent your whole career getting to a place where you thought you wanted to be when it's not in fact where you want to be? Um, so whatever I was doing, it was working to like sort of get me ahead, but it wasn't working in terms of getting me to a place that felt really fulfilling and meaningful. So I changed the way I was thinking and said, instead of asking myself, what job do I want? What career is right for me? I said, let me flip that around and ask, who am I and what is my purpose?
Mhm.
And what can I do to honor that through my work?
Mm.
And that's really where it all connected for me. And I realized that my purpose is about holding safe space so that people have the courage to find and live their truth. And
Mm.
that for me was this really like deep connection with my experience coming out as a gay person in college, and just really wanting a safe space to be myself. And that same theme kept coming up over and over in my career in my highlight moments when I really felt like I was giving my best. That's what I was doing. I was creating safe spaces for people to really show up and bring their truth. And so that's what I'm now translating into my coaching business,
Mm.
is creating a space for leaders to really have the courage to step into the leader that they were meant to be, and really step into their own voice and their own style, and sort of practicing getting rid of this expectation there's a certain way that you're supposed to lead or that you're supposed to be when you show up in a corporate environment, and really helping people live more into their truth and who they are.
Wow, that's such a beautiful background, beautiful story. Um, of course, the show is about purpose. How do you define purpose, and how does it show up in your life?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it was such a key purpose was such a key element for my journey, and it takes a center stage in the work that I do with my clients. And I was really inspired by, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with Simon Sinek, and I'm sure you are too, by a lot of the work that he's done around purpose. And I bring a lot of that into my coaching as well. And so I've taken from him really the sort of breaking purpose down into two components, which is one piece is the contribution, and the other piece is your impact. So what's the contribution that you're uniquely positioned to offer this world based on what you're good at, what you love to do, what really ignites you? Everyone has a sort of essence in terms of what they contribute that's unique to them.
Mhm.
And everyone also through that contribution creates an impact that's really meaningful to them. And so um, looking at those two things together is how I think about purpose, and how I encourage others on this journey to connect with more deeply.
Mm. So you used the word connection,
Mm.
connected a few times, and could you elaborate more on that concept? Why is connection key to business?
Thanks for calling that out. I actually hadn't realized that, and I do notice now that you say that I use that word actually quite intentionally,
Mm.
because I think a lot of people use the word find, like find your purpose,
Mm.
as if it's a sort of like hunt or scavenger hunt or game to uncover. And there's just something about connecting with the purpose that already exists there that was such a visceral experience for me when I was doing a lot of reflecting and thinking about this. And so I use that intentionally because it's a sort of invitation for people to know that your purpose is there, right? You're not on a journey to find your purpose necessarily. This is just my perspective. Um, the purpose exists within you, and it's the path from purpose, not the path to purpose, that I think is really powerful and meaningful. So it's connecting with your purpose to really get on that path from that place of knowing and meaning that I sort of guide my clients along.
So earlier in our conversation, you mentioned about being gay, and
Mm.
I'm curious to know what your experience was like in that journey and how that evolved, as well as how that connects to your leadership.
Mm. Man, that's that's a whole box of like, that's a whole place to go, man. And I'm so happy to go there too. Thanks for asking. Yeah, I mean, it was a real challenge for me coming out in college. I was a Division I golf athlete at a pretty homogenous, like Southern school.
Mm,
Um, and just like big picture, there were no other gay athletes that I knew of that were openly gay or out on campus. In the world of golf, there are no gay professional golfers that are visible at all either.
mhm,
So it's like a theme, right, for anyone as a part of an underrepresented group, where if you don't see yourself in others, it's easy to feel like you don't belong, right? So just personally, it was a pretty challenging, stressful journey in my college years as I kind of came to understand more about who I was. And, um, it was so stressful that I developed shingles along my side and back. There was a moment in my freshman year when this was all sort of coming to a head, where the shingles were so bad, and I couldn't lay in my bed with a sheet over me because it was so uncomfortable. And so I took a Benadryl to try to go to sleep, but I couldn't. So now I'm just walking down the halls of these like tiled floors, fluorescent lights at 2 a.m., just like a zombie from the Benadryl and in pain from the shingles, thinking like, gosh, this is like, what is my life? Um, but at the same time, I've been incredibly blessed with a supporting and loving family, and all things considered, I've had a very like privileged journey of coming out and being really lovingly accepted by the people that I love most.
mm,
Um, but the journey of coming out and stepping into my own is a journey that just always continues. So stepping into my first job out of college, it's sort of looking around and looking for signals to say, I'm safe here, you're okay, you can show up fully as who you are.
mm.
And then doing that all over again then the next time I go to a different job. And always having those antenna up to say, am I safe here? Is this okay? But as I've gotten older and have, developed into more visible leadership positions, just getting more comfortable showing up as I am, fully talking about my life, my full life, my partner. Um, and that's what I want for people that I work with. You mentioned in my introduction, I really am so dedicated and committed to supporting LGBTQ plus leaders, because I know that there's just an element of our identities that plays a role in how we show up at
Mm.
work and how we lead, and it has a real impact. And I just have such compassion for those folks.
Yeah. Wow, that's powerful. Thank you for sharing. I kind of wonder now that you mentioned about your coming out story, if we have, I don't know if the word is an advantage over others who aren't, um, identify as LGBTQ. I myself identify as a gay man as well. And I began this journey of discovery, um, when I was 14. And
Mm,
so now that I think about it, I wonder if that took me to this journey of purpose, because as I was questioning my, my identity, it launched me to other aspects of my life. Like, what do I want to do with my life? Um, now that I'm gay. And what's your take on that? Do you think we have, as uh, gay men, or lesbians or bisexual transgender individuals, an advantage over others because we have to think about this at an early age? Or is it just, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I love thinking about like our queerness as an advantage, and I would absolutely like empower anyone to to really live into that and to bring that as something that's really beautiful and
Mhm,
an advantage for them in life versus thinking about it as, oh, like I'm in somehow now at a disadvantage in my life, career, etc.
mhm,
But it's a really great reflection that you offer. And as it relates to, I think the bigger picture thing that I'm thinking about is, yes, I think it forces us to be a bit more introspective
mhm,
and um, willing to explore, open to exploring. There's no universal experience around this. So as I say that, I know that this is not a shared experience. Every person who identifies as LGBTQ is this really like introspective,
mhm,
like reflective person. So I think that's a bit like of a separate thing. But
mhm,
I do think for me, and it sounds like for you also, I mean, I was constantly, in my head and thinking about who I am. And that is an opening of a door to self-discovery and ongoing self-discovery. And
mhm,
that definitely has played a role in my personal and professional development. Every year in my career, pretty much I was like pausing throughout the year to say, what do I really want? And what really are my strengths? And how do I really want to be showing up? And how does being gay fit into all of this? And
right.
when I left the corporate world, I had this really, it was a journey to like kind of peel away a lot of the corporate, stuff, the layers that I had piled on for years and years, because there's just sort of I don't know, this expectation that sort of exists, but I think also I created a little bit. And sometimes we do that in
Mhm,
terms of how we want to show up or not show up fully in our work. And
mhm,
so it took a long time for me to just get rid of that like corporate persona and really let the playful, loving, joyful Chris like really come out. And I think again, that's what translates so much into what I'm passionate about supporting other leaders to do, is to just like see the beauty in them and bring more of that
mhm,
out into the world, because that's what really creates inspiring leadership, is when people show their humanity.
mhm. Of course, that takes a lot of courage to show up authentically and fully. Not everyone wants to show up in that way because they may feel that they might lose their job, or they might be discriminated against for the next promotion. So, what's your thought on that? Like, should people show up regardless, despite those those challenges ahead?
Yeah, it's a really important question. I don't think there's a should or should not about it.
Mm,
I think that's such a personal journey and a personal decision, and there's so many factors that play into that, that
mm,
I'm not going to sit here and say everyone should come out and be fully expressed and don't worry about whatever anyone's going to say. There's a real element of, yeah, of concern to have
mm,
based on legislation and laws and like real you know um like repercussions to that. And it kills me that that's a reality. um but that's why we get so well trained on assessing our environments and using those like clues and signals to say, am I safe here, am I not?
mm,
I um it's been a real practice in self-awareness for me. I just moved from New York City to Tampa, Florida, and I have a whole lot of like judgments and bias that I bring with me coming to Florida. And I have to really kind of check that as I interact with the world around me. And it brings me back to when I was first coming out.
Mm,
And I would always sort of prejudge people before just allowing myself to show up, and be comfortable as myself. And I'm just starting to notice that a little bit more as I'm here, and my biases are showing up again, and my
mm,
um, I just need to like check that a little bit more. But it's just I mention that because we're talking about like signals, and
mm.
um, that's definitely present for me, and I'm sure it's present for a lot of people.
Yeah, yeah, that's important to be mindful of our thoughts and how that affects our actions and how we treat people. It's
Yeah.
very crucial. Thanks for sharing that. Um, so you're fairly young and I take it successful. What are some of the top, let's say, 3 success habits that you have that you're willing to share with others?
Hmm. It's, thank you for the acknowledgement of my age. um, yeah, I'm just sort of pausing to think about like successful, like what does that really mean? But you know, one of the main things that's really important to me as I continue to build out my business is having routines, especially a morning routine, and that
Mm,
um, is not a novel idea, but there's, for me personally, like the consistency of having a time when I'm waking up in the morning, committing to exercise in the morning, having my morning coffee is like a ritual that is so sacred to me that like
mm,
helps me ease into my day.
mm,
Um, and the habits that I create around my morning routine
mm,
all kind of like add up to setting me up for a day where I feel really balanced and focused.
mm,
Um, I think that's like the biggest thing that I would like attribute in terms of like habits.
mm,
The other thing that's been really helpful for me is just knowing that I do really well with accountability and
mm,
setting up regular accountability calls with peers of mine. So every Monday, I have an accountability call with 2 other people where for an hour, we sit down and we create content together. We just log into a Zoom, we keep our cameras on, but we go on mute and we just like work, and we tell each other what we're going to do in the hour, and we reconnect 5 minutes before the
mm,
top of the hour, and we hold each other accountable around that. And every Tuesday, we do the same thing around a different topic.
mm,
Um, and creating systems of accountability has been really powerful for me, and I think can help for a lot of people too when they're trying to move forward on some area of their life.
mm. Yeah, I haven't really thought of that, but you're right that having someone accountable to our actions is important to us progressing, especially during days when we don't feel like doing anything. And so,
Yeah. And
um,
those days are fine, but like those days can sometimes add up. And when you're also, working towards a goal, and you're the only person responsible for that,
right.
it's really easy to let yourself off the hook. So yeah, Seth Godin talks a lot about putting yourself on the hook, and I love that as a way to like create forward momentum. And you can do that by just claiming something, like declaring something powerfully and sharing that with someone else, or sharing it publicly, or um, you know when I started in my own business, speaking opportunities, events were something that I was sort of shying away from a little bit. So a way to put me on the hook was to just put something in the calendar and just know that, all right, I have the thing booked. Now I have to show up and do it and do the work to create it. So
Mm,
um, that's a sort of accountability practice also.
yeah, this is just a side thought, but I kind of wonder if accountability partner should be replaced. I'm sorry, a mentor should be replaced with accountability partner. Or, you know, I mean, I've certainly had mentors throughout my entire, career, and although they were great in providing guidance, you know, there were times where I slacked off a little bit because I just didn't feel like doing the work. And it's this mindset that, you have to change in order to um, get to doing the work. I don't know if you know Mel Gibbs. Is it Mel Robinson? I should say. She talks a lot about like the 5 second rule, where when you're contemplating on a count of five, you just launch yourself up. Don't think about it. Don't feel it. Just do it, and then
Mhm.
eventually, you'll sprung into action and do the task. So I thought that was a fascinating action-oriented skill to leverage in case if I needed that in days when I feel like I don't want to, in days where I'm not, I don't feel like I'm as ambitious as I should be.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I'd also to that, for me anyway, it's always getting back to and reconnecting with why I'm doing this in the first place. And that's kind of brings it back to purpose, right? Is having a real clear, true, deep understanding of why it is you're doing what you're doing.
Mhm.
And that's such a grounding place that I think can really feed resilience in times when things are getting tough.
Mm. So, what inspires you to continue doing the work you're doing, waking up every morning, growing, challenging yourselves?
It's the conversations that I have, I think, with people that I work with.
Mhm.
Um, and it all, again, it connects back to my purpose. So when I have a coaching conversation and I see that my client is like having a breakthrough
Mhm.
and is now showing up like a little bit more in a way that feels real to them, that is like the best feeling in the world for me. And that just gets me so excited about what I'm doing. So creating those spaces for people to really show up, it always it ties back to my purpose. So
Mhm.
another, outside of the coaching that I do, I run this community called Queer, Queehr, for queer people leaders. So a very niche group of people in the LGBTQ plus community who work in people, talent, DEI, culture. And we have monthly calls. I lead a meditation. It's like a totally different take on networking because there's much more meaningful connection, and we just support each other. So if there's a challenge that you're bringing, something at work that's tough, you really tap into the collective wisdom of the group and have a space to be vulnerable and support each other. And it goes back to my purpose. It's creating a safe space so that people can live more fully into their truth. And in that space, people feel comfortable doing that. And
Mhm.
that, like our last month's call, I left, I was in this room, I went to the other room and I was like, this is like so amazing. I love this so much. So it keeps me going. And I think we all, need to like tap into that feeling more and find the things that make us feel that way more, and just find ways to maximize that as much as possible. And if there's I offer an exercise to really think back into people's careers and life, even to say, what were those moments when you felt like that magical sense of excitement and energy, and that you felt really fulfilled and like you're proud of what you're doing, and just kind of understand and dissect a little bit about what was happening in those moments to really get to the core of your purpose and what you're contributing and the impact that you're having.
Right. So I love the notion of impact. I like to visit that. So, but before we get there, I do want to touch on the concept of psychological safety. So,
Mhm.
of course, it takes skill to create an environment where people can feel psychologically safe to show up authentically, fully, and be vulnerable. How do you create that space for people?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much research on this, and I'm not a researcher, so I won't try to like cite numbers or be an academic about this. Um, but I think to put it simply, I think it's about bringing your humanity.
Mm,
And what I mean by that is bringing humility, is bringing vulnerability, is being a willingness to make a mess and to stand in that mess and to clean it up, to
mm,
take responsibility for stuff that you say that is going to have an impact in a way that you didn't intend to. um, it's like letting go of your ego. uh,
mm,
it's seeing people and acknowledging people, for who they are and for where they are. um, that's sort of my soft coachy spiel about it.
mm,
I think more tactically, I think you can create agreements for if you're with a group of people, if you're on a team, you're leading a team, or part of a group, you create really clear and powerful agreements about how you're engaging in that container of a team.
right.
So we're going to agree that we're going to show up with radical honesty and openness. We're going to agree that we're going to like give 100%. And if we're not, we're going to call each other out on it. And just creating, creating agreements that are very clearly stated and understood
Mm,
versus what we often do, which is create unspoken expectations for how people show up or
mm,
engage or not.
right. I think part of it too is asking the group, what is it that they want out of this? And and I because so often, for example, when I'm leading a meeting, I often go in and sort of, especially if I'm always on the go, and ahead of some of the folks in terms of like my insight on a project or plan, assume that they would have the answers, and part of it they don't. And so it's asking questions, asking where they are, and what kind of meeting or group do they want to take out of this. And so it's important to, of course, like you said, create these agreements ahead of time so people are aware and that
Yeah.
all of them are acknowledging this you know this plan.
Yeah, I think I'm just thinking back to some of the moments where maybe I felt like unsafe psychologically in the workplace. And I think what I would have wanted in those moments is like an agreement and like leadership really showing this,
Mm,
that like mistakes and like messing up and getting messy is like celebrated. Like let's celebrate that
mhm,
and learn from that. I think there is a lot of fear that
mm,
people have in the workplace with power dynamics and how you want to posture, and you know your manager's watching and you're in a room with the CEO and there's all these like invisible contexts that you're working within.
mm,
So just like bringing that out into the space and like allowing that to not matter as much by way of like celebrating the messiness and the failures and this like what people would think is like stupid stuff.
right. Yeah. Or like even saying something as simple as there's no such thing as stupid questions in this meeting.
Mm.
And it gives people a chance to lower their guards and really show up authentically. And, then that creates creativity, which leads to innovation and growth for the company. All of that is important. Of course, you're familiar with Brene Brown's power of vulnerability. I want to cover this topic because there were various points in my career where I did show up authentically and fully, and I was denied a promotion, um, and or I was discriminated against because of my sexual orientation. And looking back, like I wouldn't regret it because I stayed true to myself. And that was the power that I had. And it was something that I celebrated and
Mm,
will continue to do so today. And so, um, again, going back to this conversation, showing vulnerability takes courage. And depending what type of organization you work at, you could be fired for showing vulnerability. And so when you're engaged in conversations with people who, um, or leaders, I should say, who don't value the power of vulnerability, like what are some of those conversations like, and how do you get them to understand that this is needed within a culture of an organization? It's important because of various positive aspects.
mm. Yeah, first I just want to acknowledge you for your courage, and your own experience. And I, I don't think a lot of people would have that same courage to do that. So thank you for that. Yeah, my like my real answer is like, it's really hard to change from, like, if you're an employee in an organization, it's really hard to make a leader more vulnerable. Like,
Mhm,
that is a very difficult position to be in if
mhm,
you're like wanting a leader that's really senior to you to bring more vulnerability. I think
mhm,
there's a really like tactful way to deliver that and to share, your own experience, and um, depending on the relationship you have with that person. Like, a lot of coaching, a lot of brave leadership is about helping people get present to the impact that they have in that space. And so sharing very vulnerably, because that's a vulnerable place to be,
right.
um, the impact that you're seeing from where you sit, which could be, it's not a capital T truth. It's just what you're bringing,
Mhm,
to share that with someone, and they have every right to be open to that or not.
mhm,
Um, but I think that's part of, stepping into leadership wherever you are in an organization, is helping other people get present to the impact of the way that they're being.
mhm,
And you know, some people will respond really well to that and some people won't. And that's just the uncertainty and risk that is vulnerability.
mhm. It's amazing. Thanks for sharing that. Um, Speaking of, um, so I want to cover some of the resources that maybe perhaps we could get my listeners to listen to or to check on. So, like books, for example, what are some of the books that inspire you, or podcasts or content that you think would help my listeners as they're on this journey of finding their own purpose?
Yeah. Um, oh, I've been on such a dry spell these last like 6 weeks with all the moving I've been doing. Um, but my all-time, like, my favorite book that I would recommend to any person who is an entrepreneur or thinking about being an entrepreneur,
Mhm,
uh, or growing any sort of business, is the book called Growing a Business by Paul Hawken. It was recommended to me by the CEO of the last company I worked for, who's now one of my best mentors. And it's just such an honest, vulnerable, authentic look at what it means to grow a business. And what I love about the message is that, and it sort of relates back to purpose, right? Is that your business just becomes an extension of who you are.
mhm,
And connecting with that sense of purpose is really a powerful foundation for creating something meaningful in the world. And it was one of those books that is so not your like typical business book, and
mhm,
it just sort of reinforced a lot of the ideas that I was playing around with in my head about my own business, that sort of gave me that permission in a way to say, oh yeah, you're like really validated in what you're thinking about creating of values. based, purpose-driven
Mhm.
offering,
Yeah. And there's probably a lot of research on this too, that businesses that are purpose driven, uh, will outperform their competitors because they have something to look to, and it's an inspiration, and it keeps them going when their business is being disrupted, or there's just immense change, like what's happening currently with COVID. Um, and so, I think that if we could get the discussion going on an individual basis, whether it's with our friends or family or colleagues, well, what is purpose and how does that show up in their life and what does it mean for them? And to then transform in organizations, I think that we would really create, you know, uh, a lot of good in this world, through social impact and volunteerism and philanthropy. And so, speaking of impact, going back to my original question,
Yeah.
um, what does impact mean to you in your business?
Yeah. Um, the way that I've learned to think about impact, and I preach this all the time, is about, especially as it relates to purpose, what is the impact you want to have that is meaningful to you,
Mm,
that is meaningful to you and not anyone else.
mm,
I think it's very easy for us to be in this like commercialized career mindset where, if you think about interviewing, or even if you're at a job and you're trying to get a promotion, it's very commercialized. There's a package, you have to present yourself, and there's what are your strengths, what are the things they want to hear, and
mm,
all that's great, and it's important for getting to the next step. And it also feels quite commercialized. When you're interviewing, you talk about the impact that you've had and how many hundreds of tickets you've closed, and all the customer like NPS scores that you have, and the thousands of people you've impacted, et cetera, et cetera.
mm,
And all of that's great, but when it comes to what it means for you and the sense of purpose,
mm,
it's really about, well, what's the impact that you've had that's most meaningful to you? So I work with someone right now, one of my clients, and she's doing a lot of contract recruiting work.
mm,
And she could list off the number of people that she's placed in jobs.
mm,
Like, she doesn't really care about the number so much. She cares about, in a specific conversation, that a candidate from an underrepresented group feels seen and acknowledged for who they are.
mm,
And that simple impact is what really connects with her. And that is her sense of purpose, which is about advocating for people
mm,
to help them be seen and to really center the margins. She doesn't care about like influencing millions of people in the world.
mm,
That little piece of impact is what creates such meaning and purpose. And
mm,
sort of expanding on that, I think it creates so much accessibility for people then to create a sense of purpose by thinking about really what impact they want to have that's just meaningful to them and not necessarily glamorous or
mm.
going to be impressive by other people's standards.
Yeah, and it almost sound like what you're trying to get at too, and maybe you are getting at this, is being of service to others, and how that uh, taps into our sense of existence in this world. And so, um, I think that having impact in all areas of our life is crucial to us growing and evolving to be a better version of ourselves, so that we can um, really shine and really ultimately achieve fulfillment, which leads to our true north. So, um, well, Chris, this is an amazing conversation. I'd love to continue, but unfortunately, we're about that time. I've got just two last questions. My next question here is, what advice would you give my listeners as relates to purpose and meaning?
As it comes to purpose and meaning?
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I'm just really gonna take a second for that to sink in. I think at the end of the day, what I would offer is to really focus on enjoying the journey. And I think we get very caught up in destination thinking.
Mm,
And just as I think back on my career and my journey, I think I would have encouraged myself to be more present in what I was creating and how I was bringing myself to each of the, steps along my way. And
mm,
my journey is just continuing, and it's just a constant reminder to enjoy the process,
mm,
and which is one of my main values. That's sort of aspirational for me too. But to find ways to really enjoy and create a sense of purpose in what you're doing
mm.
as much as you possibly can.
That's beautiful. Wow. Thank you so much for that advice. You're completely right. Like, I absolutely agree that it's about the journey, not the destination.
Mm.
Um, and if we were to bring it back to meditation, which kind of ties to mindfulness and being in the present moment, all of that is important when you're on a journey to a destination, is to be mindful, be in the present moment, and really enjoy every moment. Today is what we have. We don't have tomorrow. It's not it's not a promise, right? I mean, I could get hit by the bus like after this. I mean, it's important that yeah, we do not want that. No, not for anyone. And it's important that we live fully, authentically, truthfully, um, so that we can be the best version of who we are, because we only have one shot at this, right? At this thing called life. And so we have to find, um, you know, that thing that sparks us, and ignites our soul and our light. And so my last question here is, if people want to connect with you, where can they find you?
Oh, nice. Well, first, thank you for creating the space to ignite the inspiration and spark in other people by taking on this awesome podcast. Folks can find me on my website. It's chrisrollins.me, just chrisrollins.me. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so you can search for me on LinkedIn. Those are probably the two best ways to find me.
Awesome. Well, Chris, thank you again for your time and sharing your wisdom with my listeners. Folks, if you enjoyed this content, please like, comment, and share it widely with your friends and family, as well as subscribe to my channel so that it gives me an indication to produce more of these types of conversations in your world. And thank you for listening.